Welcome. Um, Hello, everybody. Welcome to this discussion, Exile and Lunar Colonization, with filmmakers Mona Benjamin and Sara Francis, moderated by the fabulous Roshan Taponi. This conversation is presented as part of MISNA's 2021 Twin Cities Arab Film Fest, which is taking place online and in person through Sunday, October 3rd, tomorrow. I'm Lena Salah Barkawi with MISNA, a nonprofit arts organization that provides a critical platform for contemporary literature, film, art, and cultural production, centering the work of Arab and Southwest Asian and North African artists. For more than 20 years, MISNA has been creating a decolonized cultural space to reflect the expansiveness of our community and to foster exchange, examine ideas, and engage audiences in meaningful art. Named City Pages Nonprofit of the Year and a Regional Cultural Treasure, we publish MISNA, an award-winning Swana Lit and Art Journal, produce this Arab Film Fest, and offer classes, readings, performances, public art, and community events. I want to thank our festival sponsors and funders who are listed on the festival page. We at MISNA do this work as a labor of love and always prioritize supporting our artists and filmmakers financially. Please consider supporting our work to help provide programming like this by making a donation at misna.org. MISNA stands in solidarity with all Indigenous peoples and movements across the world. We recognize that in the place currently called Minnesota, we operate on stolen Dakota land and that the Dakota people are the rightful caretakers of this land. We recognize that in operating on stolen land, we are complicit in the extractive settler colonial project that is the United States. This recognition is one of several actions we must take in dismantling local and global forms of settler colonialism from Turtle Island to Palestine, Free Turtle Island, and Black Lives Matter. This discussion is being streamed live, and audience members can drop comments or questions in the chat, whether you're watching on Zoom or on Facebook, and I encourage you to do so. I'll now be making introductions and turning things over to Roshan. I'm so pleased to introduce the moderator of today's discussion. Roshan Taponi is an Assyrian Iraqi Irish film curator, programmer, writer, and academic based in London. She's founder of Habibi Collective, founder CEO of Shasha Movies, founder EIC of Artwork magazine, and co-founder of Independent Iraqi Film Festival. She's a writer at Frieze magazine, and she has recently been awarded the world-leading PhD Art History Scholarship at St. Andrews. Welcome. I'm also pleased to welcome Mona Benjamin. Mona is a Palestinian visual artist and filmmaker based in Haifa. In her works, she explores intergenerational outlooks on hope, trauma, and questions of identity, using humor and irony as political tools of resistance and reflection. Her recent works have been screened, among others, at MoMA, Another Gaze, Sheffield, DocFest, and Columbia University. And finally, I'm pleased to welcome Sara Francis. Sara grew up and studied in Beirut. The first feature film that she directed and produced, Birds of September, which we were so pleased to screen last month in our, or just a week ago in our monthly film series. It premiered at the CPH Docs main competition before screening in numerous festivals and museums. The film received awards in South Korea, Dublin, Morocco, France, and Sarajevo. Her work includes the short film Nawal's Ritual for Ashkal Alwan Video Works in 2014, among others. Her second feature film, As Above, So Below, premiered at the Berlin International Film Festival in 2020 and is now screening internationally at BFI London, Pravo Ludzki Film Festival, Gabe's International Film Fest, and of course with us at the Twin Cities Arab Film Fest. She's currently developing her third feature film. Thank you for joining us. I'm so honored to have your films in our festival and to have you in conversation today. And I'm happy to turn things over to Roshan.
Thank you so much, Lana, and really thank you as well for allowing us to be part of such an incredible film festival and organization. It's really an honor. So I'm going to address questions to both of you, and I think maybe, you know, if either of you want to jump in first, but watching both Moonscape and As Above, So Below, after, you know, both being familiar with the filmography of both of you previously, you know, they're very research-led films, and they deal with lunar histories, which is not something that you have both really covered before. So I want to hear a bit about where your interest in lunar histories came from, where your interest in lunar colonization started, and the materials, the images, the archives that you drew from to make these works and begin the process of research and filmmaking.
To start.
Yeah, go.
Okay, hi everyone, and thanks for having me in this panel. It's really nice to be able to show the film in this program. So to answer your question, like the moon as an element in the film, for me in my case, came really much later. I didn't really start the film, the idea of the film by. I mean, the film wasn't really present at the premise of the idea of, like, when I first started working on it. It was it actually came during the editing process, and I knew in this film from the very start that I would have to work with a very open mindset and to just keep developing the film as it goes. So not only before filming, but also during the shoot and in the edit. So it was a very organic process. So the moon really came as an extension of the main theme, which was really trying to find our position within this universe that we're in, and the idea of mobility and migration, but on different levels. And so the moon was an element in the sky, and once it entered the film, because the film is quite minimalist, it has very few elements, and one aspect of the moon was political, and it was the idea of colonization at a new territory, and this is how it had like these political implications. But I think it's also one angle that is developed about the moon in the film. It's all, I mean, other angles are really also this idea of the moon being this form that human beings saw in the sky from very early on, and it inspired so many myths, so many stories, and humans tried to find guidance from it and to project on it so many stories, and also they were kind of affected by it. So it's this thing that we couldn't really define, and to see how it has developed into being a territory that we kind of need to get to, and that has now political and economic implications. I'm sorry, that was long, but yeah.
No, it made complete sense. Mona, do you have any could you tell us about your filmmaking process, how your research led to the film, and how you incorporated materials around kind of lunar themes into your...
Basically the film was like a big net of mistakes and happy accidents that happened to work perfectly together, and my vision of it. But one of my teachers in the academy, when I was studying, his approach to art making was that he's constantly looking for excuses to make something. And in my case, it happened that the moon was my excuse to deal with topics that I couldn't just get my hands around fully, and deal with them and their vastness and their complexity. So I remembered the story of the lunar embassy because it was something that my mom had told me about in my childhood, and I started just exploring it. And the more I dove into that, and with the thought in my head that art is that art making is merely looking for excuses to say something that you want to say, I realized that the moon is a metaphor, and its place in Arab culture is also very, very metaphoric. So taking that, taking the story of the lunar embassy and taking my approach to art in general, and and the moon as a metaphor in our culture, basically just happened to collide together into this one piece. So I wouldn't say it was really that different than things that I've created before, except it's just like more focused, more directly symbolic, I'd say.
Mhm. And briefly for listeners who may not have read the synopses or anything, could you briefly tell the story of the lunar embassy?
Yeah, basically in 1980, there was a guy called Dennis M. Hope, an American guy, who went through a divorce that left him broke. And following that divorce, he was looking for ways to just stand back up on his feet. And he realized, like, according to what he says when he's interviewed and everything, his way of making money, the easiest way he could think of, is by dealing with the property and land. And since he didn't own any land, he thought about the moon, and he filed a claim of ownership to the United Nations. And based on many loopholes that happened in this story, he basically proceeded with his claim of ownership and began dealing with the moon and selling property on it. Um, and because so far the moon is inaccessible unless you're like Elon Musk or something, you can't really verify the fact that you have land there. So it's to him, he's basically selling novelty gifts where he gives you a map, tells you where your land is placed, and you get the certificate. So so that's the story of the lunar embassy at large.
Thank
They
you.
also, yeah.
Thanks. So following on from this, although you are both, dealing with truths or sort of constructed truths and histories, both films are incredibly experimental and reject linear narratives, or narratives of progress, which are often associated with sort of uh, globality, the space race, all of that. And typically when, especially when we're talking about Arab cinema, essayistic film often adopts a historiographical purpose and has been used by filmmakers and visual artists to build alternative histories using alternative material cultures, and witness accounts which often critically approach or even contradict mainstream or national histories of progress and of linearity. To adopt a phrase used frequently by Ariel Azoulay, who's one of my favorite people ever. This method of filmmaking is a mode of unlearning imperialism, and that really struck me when watching both of your films. So, I guess, how do your films, directly or indirectly, approach colonial or imperialist histories, or seek to detangle or deconstruct them?
Personally, I don't feel like Moonscape tries to detangle them or dismantle these approaches. It's just it's more of a reflective kind of film. As I said, I see it a little, like I see it a lot as a metaphor, and it ended up being just a bureaucratic journey, similar to any bureaucratic journey that I go through whenever I want to do anything in my daily life. So and unfortunately, I don't believe like that a single piece of artwork has enough power to dismantle such strong regimes and that have been being built for years upon years. So the only thing I could hope for is that for Moonscape to create just a moment of reflection where people could identify these patterns and other daily aspects that are related to hope and nostalgia and despair, which is what I tried to channel in Moonscape. It wasn't an attempt to go like against the system or to go on a fight or just like do an activist kind of work that just says no to everything. I was very much just like going in with the process, handling the lunar embassy in the same bureaucratic language that they have, and just seeing where it leads me and how it could affect my daily life and the way that I operate on a daily basis when it comes to colonialism and just bureaucracy in general.
Okay. And Sarah, you mentioned that there is sort of political um, what's the word, impetus behind the film, without directly asking what those politics are. How do you address this sort of unlearning imperialism when it comes to what you're doing, or your kind of the narrative that you're constructing?
I think in my case as well, it's more of a reflective kind of impressionistic film, and I think because it's kind of in the way I worked, actually the premise of the film was really the first image that came to my mind when I first started working on the film was really the image of adults waiting for their turn on a swing, and I couldn't really tell why was that interesting, and I figured out later then that this is actually lack of anchoring and lack of stability, and so this was really the starting point of the film, to really try to ask myself, how do we move from one point to another, both in an inner landscape, like from an emotion to another, or on a physical geography. And I think just by moving on a bare landscape, on an open territory, that, I mean, implied in a way questions related to partly to territory, and to the idea of how do we map a territory, but not only politically. Like the film didn't really start with this idea of making a political statement about imperialism or colonialism, or in that sense. It was just the idea of the creation, or trying to find somehow our position in the universe, to try to make sense of things. And that is often done also by finding or through just moving around and then trying to find meaning and trying to find constant different narratives, actually, to be able to make sense of things. And one of the narratives can be also political and can be so I think in the film there is this constant back and forth between the small stories, the personal inner stories, or emotional ones, or the various physical, logistical parts of it, and also like some sort of fantasies and ambitions that can be translated politically, or that can be translated in many different ways. So it's this flexibility of trying to change, to move constantly from one narrative to the other, that was actually interesting for me, to just be able to realize how the same elements we constantly need to find some sort of narrative to guide us through our quests in so many different ways. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. There are, of course, many Arab films that explicitly, approach sci-fi themes around sci-fi, around speculative fictions, histories, most notably Louisa Sansour's work, A Space Exodus, and also something I rewatched the other day, 1959, I think, satire, Journey to the Moon. And despite this, I think the region cinema is not usually associated with kind of themes of or even films with sci-fi or the space race in popular culture. And in Western culture, even though, you know, there were Egyptian researchers such as Farouk Albaz who were really fundamental in Apollo 11's success. So how do your films address popular culture? Because I'm aware that Sarah, you know, address a lot of sort of poetry in your film, and Muna with the music specifically. So do your films address, you know, how do your films address popular cultures associated with the space race or otherwise, and how are they situated within this kind of popular genre of sci-fi, if you wanna, if you would consider your films sort of to dabble in the sci-fi genre?
I think in my case also, it wasn't really a conscious choice to just say, okay, I'm going to make a sci-fi film about the future. I think it was somehow that really, I mean, the research part came really also during the editing, when I was trying to look for all the different implications of the moon. And one aspect was also the vocabulary, the richness of the vocabulary around the moon in Arabic. And the other part of, like, there was also archive about the research around the Apollo missions and all of that. So I think in that sense, to me, it was really about just keeping the playfulness of the concept of the film, to really just not necessarily be very visual about it, because I like the idea of suggesting through sound different impressions of spaces and so on. So I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question correctly, but for me, indeed, I think in the Arab world, the popular culture doesn't really speak a lot about the moon and the space race and so on. So that came almost organically and almost by chance, because I was speaking of the moon, and then I started digging further into that, and the amount of information was actually huge, and I had to pick some stories. But what was interesting to me is that aspect of exploration. We see adults with a flashlight, but then also the aspect of all the ambitions around colonization and so on. But visually, I also tried to deal with that in a very simple and minimalist way, and to just try to leave space for the imagination, and to just hint at a few things, and to just play with the same elements that I had started the film with, yeah, to keep that very simple and yet I think playful approach. Yeah.
And you just mentioned archives. Is there any particular archives that you drew from, or that kind of inspired the film?
The archive really came at a later stage. I think when I started the film, I really started with very basic elements. I just had the group of people on an open, bare landscape, and that set of swings that was somehow their only settlement, or their only the only point where they could meet up, and then this idea of just walking on an empty territory, and to just decide where they would go and how they would actually find meaning to move from one point to another. And then slowly these elements started to, and then there was the moon. And slowly, like, all these elements started, I think, taking different meanings and interpretation. Waiting on a line started, I don't know, hinting at some sort of administration sometimes, or checkpoint, or making some sort of parallels with an open territory as something abstract, but then having the moon in the sky, and all the implications of a new territory on the moon also echoed what we were living on Earth, but also a more concept, a more abstract idea of territory and of landscape, like inner landscape, physical landscape, and so on. So and the archive really arrived at a later stage when I was digging into the stories of the moon. And I think at this point during the race as well, the Russians and the Americans were trying to dig the biggest hole in the earth. So I found also that quite interesting to see how they were aiming for vertical exploration and aiming for also like digging further down to see where we are, and I think trying to position ourselves among like these elements and to try to see where we are like among the on a small scale or on a huge scale. And yes, the idea of perspective, I think, was also kind of interesting for me. So.
Yeah. Mona, how does your film address popular culture, or indeed themes around sci-fi?
Well, okay, so I have a difficulty speaking about my film when it comes to sci-fi because I'm not sure how much I would place it inside that genre. But in relation to pop culture, I think one of the most successful things that colonization managed to do is to take our imagination away from us. But the one thing that it was never able to do is to take the romance, and this is very, very apparent when we come to speak about the moon, because it's one of the most objectified objects when it comes to poetry and music and visualizations of love. So the entire film and the visuals of the film are much influenced by Arab pop culture that specifically deals with images and metaphors of the moon. The set that I created in which the film takes place is inspired by Sabah Fakhri, not necessarily Sabah Fakhri, but there was a studio in Lebanon in the 2000s that was called Studio Orbit, which would host like musical shows titled Jar al-Qamar, which is Neighbor of the Moon. And I was very drawn to this to its aesthetic because it also resembled David Lynch a lot, and there's something about David Lynch's Black Lodge that is very detached from time and space, and to see that manifest in our own culture, and it was just like a perfect embodiment of everything, and I knew that I wanted to incorporate that in my film. In addition to the fact that a lot of the work of the montage and editing of the film was to try to recreate from shots that I shot parts from music videos that deal with songs about the moon. And I think the biggest decision that is related to pop culture in the film was basically to deciding to make it into a song, and to just go with this culture of romance, and to weep over the loved one, which in the case of Moonscape, it's also the homeland, but also the moon. So yeah, in that sense, Arab culture and Arab pop culture doesn't deal with the moon in terms and in ways of sci-fi, but it does deal with it with ways that are full of love, and there's a lot that could be learned from it, and it was a very touching process for me to just keep diving in and to see the many ways that people take this shiny object and just project on it everything that they cannot have, which is basically what I did in Moonscape. It's like all my problems with borders and with being unable to travel to the homelands of my grandfathers. I continued with this tradition and projected it once again on the moon. So this is, I think, where I draw the connection with popular culture.
Thank you. And Sarah, also just briefly to talk about sound and music, because sound is used really interestingly in your film as well. Could you talk a bit about this?
Yes, well, well, because I was using really simple elements and also in black and white, I think I wanted a space that wasn't definable or easily recognizable. It was more sometimes more like an allegory of some sort. So I needed, I think, to work with very few elements, almost, and the space sometimes was used almost as a stage of somehow. So the idea was to be able to be as mobile as possible, in the sense that it is actually through sound that we are able at some point to locate ourselves or to locate the place that we are in temporarily, to hint at specific locations or at contexts or at interiors, while actually we're watching the same open landscape. But sometimes with the sound, we kind of have that feeling that we are in an interior, in an administration, on a highway, by the sea, in a country, and so on. So it is I think the sound kind of allowed me to project these spaces or to hint at them very quickly, but to keep it very impressionistic. And it was also closer to perhaps how we kind of perceive things in a very fast-paced way and very impressionistic way, without really defining the space permanently or saying this is where we are. And to so, and I guess it was also, it probably, I mean, it's also perhaps it can help the audience also participate in the creation process, because one of the themes of the film is also chaos versus organization, and to reorganize the elements differently every time, to just have a different perspective of things every time, from and a different scale to things, and so on. So I guess that allowed for, I think, more flexibility, and to just keep the imagination, to be able to create these spaces actively with the audience as well, to just project things on the image that we're seeing.
And to follow that, I mean, to follow that kind of more abstract train of thought, which is underlying your film. I read somewhere that you alluded to futurisms as that sort of grounding the film. And obviously, of course, in discussion of our region, futurism has been used. Most popularly is Gulf futurism, coined by Safiya Al-Miriya and Fatima Al-Qadiri, to suggest that there are certain aspects of the Western imaginary of the future that already exist in the Gulf or in the wider region. So are there any, futurisms? What did you mean by futurisms? Are there any futurisms in your work or in your work, Mona? And also drawing maybe on the concept of speculative fictions as well, or more abstract, any abstractions around futurisms or fictions.
I don't think it's me who used that word in connection to the film. It's probably someone who interpreted it in that sense, but probably again, it's not really futurism exactly for me, but it's just the idea of it does ask the question of whether we can do things differently, and whether with all this hype of space exploration and so on, or even where we are on in the landscape we inhabit at the moment, like is it possible to do things differently, or in that sense, there is perhaps an idea of questioning the future and trying to see how that applies. But it is trying to find different narratives, and but I think that's it for in my case.
What about you, Mona? Is there any sort of futurisms or fictions at play?
I mean, I find it pretty difficult for me to define it according to this kind of timeline. The film, when to relate it to genres such as futurism or science fiction, and things that are annotate a very specific point in time and in the development of certain art movements, because the timeline that I was working with when I was creating Moonscape was based on three, I want to say simple, but not so, divisions, which are, you know, past, present, future, and the way that the past is related to despair, the present is related, sorry, the past is related to nostalgia, the present is related to despair, and the future is related to hope. So after this this timeline has been so set in my mind when I was working on the film, it became very hard for me to tie it to any other genre or definition, because at this point the future was so fixed with the idea of hope, the past was so fixed with the idea of nostalgia, and the present was so fixed with despair, that I didn't want to not necessarily intellectualize it, but to think of it in terms that are less human than just immediate emotions that one would feel when coming to divide time. So I don't know if I answered the question really, but there's also a very big chance that I'm the worst interpreter of my own film. So there's just saying that.
No, it's a great interpretation, and also, I mean, just understanding time through emotions, obviously, rather than sort of any theoretical framework, is always something that touches people in a much more meaningful way, I think. So I think, yeah, that definitely makes sense. I'm aware that, you know, we have to open it up, so I'm just going to ask one more question. I really, you know, there's so many, I mean, like you alluded to earlier, Muna, when you name dropped Musk, there's so much conversation around space in the broadest sense possible now. The space colonization attempted by figures such as Musk, Bezos, and closer to home, I mean, the UAE's very ambitious space program, which reached Mars in February earlier this year. So if at all, where do your films sit in current discussions around space and time?
My films personally still sit in Palestine. I mean, they're still not moving from that area very much. It was all just a process of trying to find hope and losing it at a certain point. So right now, I kind of put the idea of going to the moon or trying to reach it, or trying. The point was never to try to reach the moon. The point was trying to reach Syria and Iraq and Lebanon, and trying to figure out how the moon could be my assistant in that. And towards the end of the film, that hope kind of gets destroyed. So I don't see it so much as a film that is related to traditions of space and of futurism and things like that. So right now it's sitting here with me struggling with the same bureaucratic shit that I am struggling with.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah, can your film be situated in any contemporary discussion around space, around territory, that you're talking about?
Well, I think, yeah, also in my case, it's, I mean, the main question of the film is really just, it doesn't really have a specific argument in the sense that I don't aim to make a political film that, you know, to say that this is how we should see things, and it's not like an activist film at all. It's really just to try to show the different narratives around things, and to just try to, it's really a group of people trying to find their own understanding of the world they live in, but that is not only political, that is like on so many levels, I think. And it's just the idea of trying to find a point of reference and to try to give meaning to our to the elements that we can, but that we are able to perceive, and how these elements really our interpretation of them can change from depending on the perspective that we have, depending on where we stand, depending on the past, the present, the future, and how all these elements are so. This is an eternal kind of movement that is so subtle, and one of the narratives is political because this is the world we live in. So I think that the information or the hinting at the moon race or at the colonization is there, but I think the film keeps a distant, aims at keeping some sort of equal distance between the different narratives. There is the political one, but there is also a more geographical one and more like personal one, existential one. So it's like, it's more like yes, it's just like trying to see, I think it's just reflecting and questioning rather than just fighting for something or just affirming something too strongly.
Yeah, it's like a map. It's kind of like a map of territories, of kind of questions, of statements, of everything. It really creates this, through this map, it creates like a new world, which I guess is the kind of what you are showing in the film. Okay, so we have 15 minutes. If people have questions for Sarah and Muna, I see 2 messages in the chat. One is by Kareem. NPR did a story about the Lunar Embassy a couple of weeks ago, but for some reason did not interview Muna. Let's all, listen to.
I can comment on that because I had quite the beef with the Lunar Embassy after I made the first draft of the film. So naturally, they wouldn't want to approach me.
Oh my God, what's the beef?
When I made the first draft of the film, I put it available on Vimeo for a while. And then some point I said that they are racist because their website is not accessible to aliens and it only communicates in human languages, and they took that as a very big offense. And they wrote me like a very big, we're disappointed in you. We didn't think that this is what you were gonna say to us, and then it was once again a back and forth, like, hey, listen, I'm a Palestinian, this is humor, ta 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 ta. So yeah, I don't think NPR would want to interview me alongside Dennis.
That's very funny. I didn't know that. But all of these sort of bureaucratic websites are alien in a way. Like, even when you're thinking about film submission forms for Cannes, they only have it in English, French, I think Cantonese or something, and then it's like alien to everyone else, to filmmakers from everywhere else in the world. So it's very strange how the languages they choose, and also the kind of really the kind of real limits put on language. So I think you're making a big statement there, actually, as well as just. Does anyone have any questions? I don't know if people want to jump in, write in the chat, or do the raise hand function. No one's got anything to say about the films? Okay, it looks like you guys are getting off easy. There's a Lana message in chat. Okay, so maybe if anyone wants to ask questions, they can while I just continue the conversation. But what kind of themes are you going to be approaching in because I know you're both working on films now. Do they kind of continue what you're exploring in these works now, or are you going in completely different directions with your projects?
Well, in my case, I think it will be very different, probably with a bit of distance when these films are done. Maybe there's like I'll see some common points or some sort of topic that links everything. But the next one is more of a narrative film, an intimate like narrative film. So it's very different in the form and the subject to the two previous ones.
Okay, and Mona?
Yeah, right now I'm writing with three other friends as a collective. We're writing a feature film, an episodic one, and it's going in many different directions. But I know for a fact that one of the things that are most important for me to have in the film, as any other thing I make, is humor. And apart from that, it's kind of difficult to disclose anything more. So
top secret information. And also just occurred to me now, the black and white, which is something that you both use. Why black and white? Why did you?
To me, it was related to the aspect of nostalgia, mostly, and also because it's kind of it's the closest thing that you can get to a black, like a white sheet when you're coming to work with cinema. It's a bit of what I spoke about before about the David Lynch Black Lodge. I mean, I did want to create a space where it's unclear where it's situated in time and space. So black and white really served this purpose, and also just to tie it to the aspect of nostalgia.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah, why did you?
Yeah, so I think as well, it was really the idea of working with very few elements, and to not be able to locate the film as well and situate it in a specific time and space, and to just keep more of I wanted it to be a space where we could project different things at different times in the film, and to be able to reshuffle the elements differently. And so yeah, I think the black and white made it a bit more neutral and a bit more like almost allegorical in a way. So
Lana has asked a question in the chat. How have your films been received differently within, I guess, the Western context, and also within Arab spaces, and also between different types of audiences? Have you screened Sarah, your film's probably still in the festival circuit, is it?
Yes, it is.
So I guess where has it was at Berlinale, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did they receive it in comparison to if you've shown it to a Arab audience?
Actually, the Berlinale was really, I mean, I was lucky to have a premiere with just before the COVID lockdown started. So it was physical. I mean, I was there physically, and
your sound has gone.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, I can still hear Sarah.
I tried to mute and unmute myself, but
oh yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Or maybe it's my internet. I'm sorry, I'm in a hotel.
No worries. So yeah, no, I mean, so the film premiered in Berlin. It was actually the festival that happened right before the lockdown in 2020. So after that, many screenings happened online, and so I couldn't really tell what was the audience reaction. So I'm not really sure how to compare like the different feedbacks from different audiences, but it's true that even within like I think in general, like I'm not sure if it has to do with being an Arab audience or a more international one, but I don't know, like some people are interested in like non-typical structures and were drawn to that. Others were expecting maybe something more linear, but the idea as well of speaking about the moon and so on, like I think it was maybe refreshing in a sense, because it's not really a topic that is often discussed in and it doesn't speak about directly about a reality we live in a very tangible and detailed way. But at the same time, I'm sure that other people also felt that it was something a bit too abstract, considering like the situation that or the topics that are prevailing in that region. And I'm really, I don't know. It's just like speculations. So.
And what about you, Mona?
I think the biggest difference specifically in Moonscape, in terms of how different audiences perceive it, is that I see how emotional it is for people from my community to watch it, because they can strongly identify with let's call it a border situation. And it's something that whenever it is brought up, you can see how it pinches the heart, no matter in what way you bring it up. So it's something that's for a Western audience. I don't think that they'll be able to relate. As much as they try, it will always be accompanied by a sense of pity or like false sympathy. But there's something about showing my films in our own communities, whether they be in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria, and Iraq, and just the entirety of the Arab world. It's way more different, way more personal, and it's a much more touching experience that whenever I get lucky to have such experience, I learn a lot from it. Because also these audiences, I feel, allow themselves to be most honest also with their criticism, and to ask the most direct question, no matter how stupid in terms of like the art world they may sound. There's something still when the film is presented in festivals and in front of Western audiences. It's always related to this sort of events where it's a lot of like intellectual ego fights, where everyone's question isn't sincere, but just a matter of trying to show who can use the most intellectual terms when speaking about a certain film. And when I show this, when I got the chance to show Moonscape and also my previous film Trouble in Paradise in front of a local audience, it was completely different, and the conversation was very, very honest and sincere and touching, and it's something that's difficult to put in words, but yeah, the difference is very, very apparent.
Yeah, and that's something I think that, just to add a comment on that as well, for Lana's question, it's something that most filmmakers tend to say. I think that there is a huge actually difference when showing locally, and just making sure that the films are shown locally as well is always a sort of as a programmer is really important. So there's two more questions. We only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to combine them into one. They are directed more towards Muna. So Muna mentioned the inspiration from pop culture from the past, but also how the past is a symbol of despair. Although I think you also said nostalgia. How do you think these overlap or intertwine? And that's by Nahala. And then Hussein said, thank you for this nice and informative conversation. A question to Muna. Can you tell us more about your three the visual work inside your film, and which advantage do you see in using such elements in filmmaking?
For the first question, I would say that the past is tied to the symbol of nostalgia and not despair. Despair is much more related to the present, and the way that I see it, and the way that a lot of Sufis also believe that it's related to the religious story of when Iblis was banished from heaven after refusing to bow down to Adam once he was created. So basically there was this division in time following this event that brought with it the concept of time as we know it today, which is past, future, present. And the past became tied to nostalgia because Iblis wished to return to be in God's presence. Despair, because in the present he was not in God's presence. And hope, that is related to the future, because he wanted to be in God's presence once again. This is like very briefly, very trying to just say it all very, very quickly. And the rest of the question.
3D elements, or I don't really know what.
Yeah, the 3D, the dancing alien, I basically took it from a free YouTube video because I wanted a dancing alien, nothing too sophisticated about that. He danced perfectly and I'm very proud of him, and that's it.
Amazing. I think that's a great place to end. Thank you both so much. And thank you to Mizna for hosting. And I hope everyone has a lovely evening or day wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.